In the past, we have tended to overrun. We'll see how it goes. Michael, do you need to rush off immediately after the hour, or do you have a bit of headroom?
No worries, it's just eating up my lunchtime.
Oh dear, right, okay.
No,
Yes.
I'm comfortable to run also longer.
Okay, fine. I'll read out Lester's question for him. Okay, Lester has 2 questions on the improvement in dynamic range. We read up to 1 stop in improvement in dynamic range. What is a stop in the context of the EM1X? Basically, he wants to know how much of an improvement is there over the DR on the EM1X. Measured, and it gets a bit technical here, measured approximately 9.7 bits log squared, log 2 EV at ISO 200. What might be expected of the OM1 dynamic range measured in bits? So, Michael, I think you saw this question earlier.
I did, actually.
And off you go.
Off you go. I just try to share the screen, which the
yes, okay.
question is referring to. Just
okay.
So here, so I think he's referring to this website. You see that?
Yeah.
So when you select only the EM1, then you have here 9.7 EV steps dynamic range, and we say, by the way, there's a DxO measurement behind.
It's quite a nice straight line, isn't it?
Yeah, and we do say that the new camera, the OM1, has 1 f-stop better dynamic range, and that was also the reason why I had the EOS R6 here in. As you can see, when you, for example, go to this mentioned 9.74 nits, then it's approximately 1 f-stop better than ours. And exactly that we are referring to, that the 1 f-stop better dynamic range is on the level of 35mm format camera. And I did some comparison with the R6. That's the reason why I just opened it up. And the Sony Alpha 7 II, 3, sorry, which is this one, which is quite close to the R6, as you can see. And also the practical test shows that we are closing this gap in regards to the 35mm format. Coming back to the question in regards to the EM1X, the EM1X is nearly exactly the same behavior as the EM1 Mark III there. So there's no difference between the EM1X and the EM1 Mark III in dynamic range performance. So you can translate that to the EM1X as well.
Okay, so although you didn't have plots measured by DxO, because I presume they haven't done it yet, on that graph, you're saying that it's quite close to the R6 and the Alpha 7 Mark III.
Yeah, when I look on these images I did by myself, comparing those three cameras, of course, this is a very subjective and not objective measure. I would say that we are very close to the dynamic range of 35mm formats, or to those two 35mm formats of format cameras. Of course, you do have differences in the 35mm format cameras as well, but looking on them, I would say we are very close to them, yes.
Okay, one thing that we did discuss before the session yesterday was there has been some speculation that you need to use software after you've taken the image to get some of the benefits. So, as I said to you, somebody who I respect a lot did say that don't expect a lot from the raw files. However, I think you have said that's a surprising comment to make, and that the raw files are already showing improvement.
Yes, of course, it depends on what software you're using to develop. It is a difference when you develop on OM Workspace or on Lightroom or on Capture One. However, you see some improvements in all three softwares, even so that Lightroom is not yet officially supporting the OM-1. So I suspect that they will increase quality when they will officially support the camera. And you see also in the raw files improvement. Most of the improvements are coming from the sensor and the itself, because it's a stacked backside illuminated sensor. We did get a lot of improvements just due to that, and then some improvements are due to the new processor, of course. But this is not counted in the communication what we are doing, that we are gaining 1 f-stop better dynamic range and 2 f-stop better noise performance. So
yeah, because my understanding is that you can't create dynamic range. It is a hardware issue. It is how many photons that the photodiodes can collect without saturating. So the actual photodiodes on the sensor are able to collect more photons. So with noise, it's a different issue. There are far more factors, and the sensor on paper does seem to have a lot of tricks up its sleeve. You can average the 4 sub-pixels and things like that. But when it comes to dynamic range, it is a hardware feature, and it should be there in the raw file.
It's definitely there. We will see that in the tests later when they become available. So dynamic range, you will be very close to the 1 f-stop we are communicating. As said, I saw that quite good in the files I compared also with the EM1 Mark III. But I have later on some images, as you asked for, to show at least the noise performance differences, also generated in camera and generated with Capture One with RAW. We can have a look on that later on, I think.
Okay. So now I don't think Lester can speak to us, but I think we may have answered at least part of his question quite well. He has got a supplementary question. He says, we read that the sensor is a 20.4 effective megapixel stacked BSI chip. Is the sensor quad bare with respect to 81.6 million photosites or subpixels? I think that's been pretty well established. And the answer, I think, Michael, you can confirm that. It's four subpixels. Yeah. That's
completely correct. What we are not doing, as you said, that we are leverage the 4 pixels or average the 4 pixels for a noise performance improvement. The only thing we are doing with the 4 pixels is autofocus this cross-type phase detection autofocus mechanism. For this is those subpixels are utilized for taking images or video. We only using the whole pixel, the 20 million ones.
Oh, okay. So you're not using the subpixels for noise reduction?
No.
And I think we already established when I spoke to you earlier that you're not using the 4 subpixels for HDR, single shot HDR either?
No.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So once again, the noise improvement is down to the characteristics of the sensor itself rather than any processing of the data off the chip.
As far as my information is, yes, the most of the noise improvements coming from the sensor. Of course, we do have additional possibilities like the AI noise reduction filter in OM Workspace, but this is coming on top.
Now, many of us already use AI noise reduction. Are we going to see improvements in in that area. So at the moment, you can get to a certain level when using something like Topaz noise reduction. Will the raw files from the OM-1 give you more headroom there?
Honestly, I don't know the third-party noise reduction software. That's one thing on my list that I would like to compare it. Our one is priority. That's the reason why it's only on the OM workspace. There is quite a bit improvement when you're using it also in the noise performance without harming the structures or the resolution too much. You can even choose whether you would like to prioritize the resolution or the structures, or you would like to have a better noise reduction. So it's working quite well.
Okay, I suppose one clarification perhaps I'd like to make is, if you weren't using AI, are you going to see an improvement in higher ISO noise?
This is an
absolutely clear.
Yeah, that's an additional improvement to what we are communicating. So the AI noise reduction in the software is more or less an add-on. You need to fit, of course, the specifications, the system requirements, but this is an add-on.
Yes, so I understand that, but if you're using, let's say, Lightroom, which doesn't have AI noise reduction, if you compare an EM1 Mark III file with an OM1 file at a high ISO, are you going to see an improvement in the OM1 file?
Okay, I think it's just time to show what I prepared.
Yes,
clarify
okay.
that a little bit.
Thank you.
So let me share firstly I think you see now. You see now the image, right?
Yes.
So this is on Jpeg, camera based. That's the OM-1, 25,000 ISO, coming directly out of the camera. So when you compare it to the EM1 Mark III, which is this image, takes a bit time. No, it's not switching now. Just a second.
Okay.
I have to make that differently. Photoshop stopped working.
Oh dear. Okay. Do you want to restart Photoshop?
Yeah, let me try.
I'm just checking through the chat while Michael does that, and lots of nice hellos. We've got a question from Richard Saville. Okay, Lester's very happy with your answer about the dynamic range. Just a question to Richard Saville. Sorry, I think I just clarify your comments about which camera we were looking at. The graphs that Michael showed were DxO measurements, and they haven't measured the OM1 yet. But what Michael is saying is that he expects the OM1 to be much closer to the R3 and the Sony A7 Mark III.
The R6. The R6.
Sorry, R6. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Than the EM1 Mark III. So it's good news. Obviously, we have to see it in the field, but it's looking good. And I've got a message from Stuart.
So let's see.
Okay, and that's the latest one so far, right?
So I think it's working again. Let's see whether it's now also working when I share my screen. So this is the OM1 at 25,000 ISO 100%. Out of camera JPEG, and I did the same image with the EM1 Mark III, also 25,000 ISO out of camera JPEG, same settings. I don't remember, but I think it was 1/8000th per second and f5.6 or something like that. So you see, at this ISO, you have a lot of color losses at the EM1 Mark III, and a lot of color noise here in the grass, and also in the grass behind the thing. And here, all the colors is lost. And when you look on the EM1 OM1, everything is much better.
Much sharper.
Much sharper, and also more colors and less noise, color noise especially. So a huge improvement in the high ISO settings. So that's out of camera.
One comment I'd like to quickly make is that I noticed that the EM1 file looked darker, and my impression of using recent cameras is that it does tend to underexpose slightly, but it looks like the OM1 produces a brighter image at the same settings, unless unless the light changed when you took the pictures.
Yeah, that could be also the white balance, because it was out of white balance a little bit. So it's a lot of influence. I just saw that a lot of things are influencing that, but yeah, it's a little bit brighter. So, and then I did process the same image. This is 100%. The same image with Capture One. So this is OM1 at 25,000 ISO. And when you compare this with the EM1 Mark III, you see also a big improvement. Also here, you see that color is desaturated in the foreground. Yeah. Capture One is a bit noisier than the JPEGs coming out of the camera, as they are not as they do not make noise reduction, or they have priority on resolution, or not to reduce the noise. And this is also clearly visible here, but there's I think a huge difference between those two cameras in noise performance. At least I see it. I don't know how you feel.
It's a cleaner, brighter, more colorful image, definitely.
Yeah. So, and this is also showing clearly that it's not only based on software, but it's also based on the sensor, this improvement.
Okay, right. I'm just going to go again through the thread online. And Lester also has a question about autofocus. We read that the OM1 provides quad pixel AF. Is this similar to the quad pixel AF that we might have read about regarding other manufacturers' DSLRs?
Honestly, I cannot tell you. I saw the patent going on with the same name, but I have not seen any details yet. And as far as I know, the OM1 is the first and only camera at the moment in the market using this technology. So I don't know the other technology yet.
Okay, I understand that Canon has patented a quad pixel AF, but I think theirs works differently. And it's not in a product yet, as far as I know.
Yeah, it's not in a product yet. And yesterday I tried to find the patent in detail, but I have not been successful yet. So I cannot comment on this yet. Sorry.
Right. But fundamentally, these are cross-type sensors across the entire frame, and there are 1,053 of them.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, so we should expect a lot from the autofocus reliability and versatility. Okay, next on to John. He has two related questions. John, are you here? Bikey John?
Yeah, yes, I'm here.
Okay, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, hello, Michael. Thank you for joining us. I'm still using one or two of the old legacy 4/3 lenses because they're lovely, in particular the 90 to 250 millimeters. So I'm wondering, will the OM1 play with them as nicely as the EM1s do? And also, will we hope to see some of the improvements in things like autofocus tracking and so on with those legacy lenses? I mean, I can't see any technical reason why we shouldn't, because that's all to do with the intelligence in the processor rather than what's going on in the lens. But it would be reassuring to know that it might give us some improvements when using that lovely old glass.
Hi, John.
Hi.
I'm happy to be here and answer the questions. First one, the 4/3 lenses are supported, also with continuous autofocus. Beside in movie, so in movie you cannot use the continuous autofocus with the 4/3 lenses. And I had already some feedback from photographers using the 300mm 2.8 lens. And he said that he sees an improvement in autofocus performance with this lens. However, of course, you cannot expect the same performance as with micro four third lenses, especially when you're shooting high frequency continuous autofocus, because this is highly depending on the capabilities of the autofocus motor on one hand side, and of course also on the weight you are moving for focusing. And as the lenses for the 4/3 system are bigger, also the lenses to move are heavier, and so the speed especially in continuous autofocus is lower than for micro 4/3 lenses.
Okay, thank you. So I understand why that could be a problem, but it's nice to know that we might still see some of the improvements. So thank you.
You're welcome.
John, did you have another question?
Well, no, that was the two questions together, really.
Okay, fine.
Will it play nicely, and will we see the improvements?
Well, I'm certainly hoping for that too. I mean, I'm using an EM1X at the moment, and the focus tracking seems to work fine on legacy lenses. And if the focus tracking is improved, then that's good news as well. I don't see why it should just stop for legacy lenses on new camera. So that's excellent. Okay, so moving on. Right. Okay, Paul, who's on the forum as Walty, are you here at the moment?
I am. Hello.
Hello, Paul.
Hello.
Oh no, that's Paul Grave. No, it's
wrong Paul.
You're not, the other Paul.
Oh, sorry. But
Okay.
I am here.
Okay. Well, I tell you what. Seeing as you are there, why don't you ask your question, and then we'll come back to the other Paul.
I'm afraid it was a rather tedious practical question, which just happens to have some impact for me. I've got a pre-order in for the OM1, and in the UK, there's an offer of a free battery for pre-orders. And because I'm off to the States very soon, I would really rather like to go with 2 batteries rather than 1. I just wondered whether the battery was coming with the pack or would be by fulfillment later. But that may not be your department, Michael, so apologies if it's a completely inappropriate question.
No problem, because you asked the question beforehand. I was able to ask this internally and got the answer that you will get the battery with the camera.
Ah, that's really good news. Thank you.
The only thing you have to do afterwards is to register yourself to the newsletter in my Olympus to get this extra warranty for the camera in the pre-order campaign. But the battery is coming with the camera.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, good news, Paul. I don't know, I can't see Walty here, so I'll ask his question for him. He says, is there a new lens development roadmap available? He's still looking forward to the 100mm macro lens.
So we have no new lens roadmap published, but the current one is still valid, and there is a macro lens in the range of 100mm on. So I would expect it in future.
Okay, so no news on that front, but no bad news either. Okay, Bill, Bill Dennis, I can see you, so you are definitely here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Would you like to ask your question?
Good morning, Michael. Thank you for this. My question was around the high-speed movie modes, and then you've got the new higher frame rate there. On the Mark III, when you start a high-speed movie recording, it locks the autofocus, so you can't track anything that's moving away from you or towards you. Is that different on the OM-1? Will we have autofocus tracking with CAF in high-speed movie mode?
No, in high-speed movie mode, you RF and exposure is locked with with starting the movie, and then it's locked until you end the high-speed movie. So there is no difference to the EM1 Mark III.
Okay, thanks. That answers my question.
You're welcome.
And you had an additional one? Oh, yes, you wanted to know about firmware updates.
Yes, I wondered whether there will be any firmware updates for the Mark III and the 1X. I often keep the previous model as a second camera, and specifically the menu updates look quite nice. I wondered if they will likely be updated on the previous cameras, if they can be.
I have no information in this direction. Sorry, I cannot share something.
That's okay. Perfectly understandable.
Yeah, there's simply no information about this yet available.
Yeah. Understand. Thank you.
One thing about continuous autofocus can work at very high frame rates using some of the other modes of shooting stills. Could you just explain? There's some confusion about which modes allow continuous focus and which modes are blackout free, SH1 versus SH2. Could you clarify that?
Okay, blackout free are all the SH modes. So SH1, SH2, and Pro Capture SH1 and SH2 are blackout free.
Just in case people aren't fully aware, what is the difference between SH1 and SH2?
SH2 is the one with autofocus, and SH1 is the one without autofocus in between. So it's the former, SH2 is the former, how was it called, L mode, and the other one is the H mode. That's more or less the differences. And then, of course, the frame rates are different. So with autofocus, you can shoot up to 50 frames per second with autofocus and exposure measurement in between. And when you lock autofocus and exposure measurement with the first image, you can shoot up to 120 frames per second.
Right.
So
that's clear. And both these modes are blackout free.
The SH modes are blackout free, yes.
Right, because they don't use the mechanical shutter.
Yes, and then we do have the mechanical shutter, of course. And we have also an electronic normal sequential shooting mode, which is with blackout, up to 20 frames per second. So we have, this is the maximum speed for the normal, I would say normal electronic sequential shooting mode. And then you have the SH1, which can be set up to 25 or 50 frames per second. And the third one is the SH2, not one. I also still mixing up, which is then either 120, 100, or 60 frames per second.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. There is a question about a base plate. I don't know whether that's one that you can answer. RRS base plate fitting the OM-1.
No, I have no base plate here, and I cannot comment on this. I think there was also a comment that Peter Bambusek already shared something. But as I don't have the plate here, I cannot comment on that.
Okay, fair enough. We'll pursue that one separately. Okay, we have a complex question from Alzibif. Is Alzibif here today?
Indeed, I am. Yes.
Alan.
Alan.
Okay, Alan.
Yeah.
Would you like to go through your question and its various parts?
Well,
Off you.
yeah. Thank you, Michael, and for everybody attending today. It's really good. I had a quick look through the manual the other day, and I was just sort of gobsmacked, really. There were 6, and if you ignore pro capture modes, 6 different sequential shooting modes, starting at mechanical with anti-shock, electronic anti-shock, and then those 2 SH1, SH2 modes.
Yes.
Now, I like shooting birds in flight. So which one am I going to choose for that? I don't want to be shooting 50 frames per second, but no blackout would be brilliant. But what would be your recommendations for something like that, Michael?
Honestly, that's quite depending on your shooting style. When you would like to be under 20 frames per second, then I would use the normal sequential shooting silent mode, which is capable to shoot up to 20 frames per second. But if you need blackout free, then you have to go to the SH2, which then is at least 25 frames per second. But for sure, I would recommend you to use the bird tracking AF, because it works much better than beforehand, and tracking is easier. And here you can decide whether you would like to use continuous autofocus plus tracking, or this is also new in the new camera. You can also choose AF or continuous autofocus without tracking. And depending on your capabilities to follow the bird, I would recommend CAF without tracking, because then the camera is only focusing on the fields you have selected, whereas in CAF plus tracking, the camera is also focusing on an object recognized when it's outside of the selected autofocus field. But of course, then you have to be able to track the bird quite well.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other question, and I didn't realize I had this in the camera, this EM1X, this anti-shock thing. I noticed that you can have electronic with 0 seconds anti-shock. How does that work? Because you don't need anti-shock if there's no mechanical involvement, surely.
The anti-shock mode is a mode, something in between electronic shutter and mechanical shutter, because that's only the first curtain is electronic and the second is mechanic.
But from what I read, Michael, sorry to interrupt,
yeah,
it said there was mechanical with anti-shock and electronic with anti-shock in the manual.
There's an electronic anti-shock?
Yes, that's what was confusing me.
Okay, that's confusing me as well, because we have only one anti-shock mode, which is the one who first curtain electronic, and the second one is mechanical.
Maybe I read a pre version of the manual.
I actually noticed that myself, and that did confuse me as well.
So in the OM-1 manual?
Yes.
I think it's actually in the press release as well, but
I have to double check that.
We'll definitely come back, and I'll publish clarification on that.
Thank you.
Okay. And anyhow, the anti-shock mode in the OM-1 is just an option. It's not set. It's not available on default. You have to make it available by yourself in the menu. As I think this shock issue we had with EM1 Mark II and III, I think in a very certain occasions with some very special a combination of lens, camera body, and hand grip is not that prominent anymore, and I think the anti-shock mode is not needed.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, glad we answered those questions, and I said I will follow up if required. Andy Johnson, you've got a very good question, I think, about slower modes without blackout. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, it's the with the electronic. you could hear with the electronic shutter, there was no blackout with the faster rate, but it meant you've got to do a minimum of 25 frames per second. And I know other people have already asked for, in a firmware update, could that be given options for a SH2 in slower frame rates?
We can always request new things for firmware updates, and I can forward this to our R&D. However, I cannot promise anything whether they will pick it up or not. It's just then up to our Japanese colleagues how they prioritize this kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Do you have any other questions?
No, it's fine, thanks.
Okay, great. Now moving on to South Coast photographer. Are you there? Okay, I'll ask his question for him. How good will availability be for the new camera? Now, I see that Mark Thacker has joined us. I don't know whether this might be a better question for Mark, especially as it's the UK. Mark, would you like to answer that?
Sure, yeah, and I'm sure Michael can answer. No, the availability should be very good. We have lots of stock coming.
Okay, so the rumored sold out allocation is not true.
I mean, there is going to be a point where the deliveries from the first batch, or the March deliveries, will get sold out by the looks of things, which is good from our point of view. So we'll start having to ship, but we get more in April. It's not like there's some coming and then there's a big gap. It won't be like for the 150-400.
Super, fantastic answer. We're getting lots of good answers today, so that's really good. Okay, thanks, Mark. Next person on the thread is Mike Toll. Mike, are you here? Okay, Mike's not here. I'll ask his question. I'd like to know what the best settings for bird in flight are. Obviously, you need bird detection turned on, but do you need continuous AF and tracking turned on for the best results, or is continuous autofocus alone sufficient instead of the plus tracking? So, Michael, I think you've done some homework on this one.
Yeah, I think I already answered. My personal view is that CIF without tracking is working quite well, as then you have better control than with CIF plus tracking, as the camera is only focusing on subject within your focusing field selected. However, it's of course depending on the capabilities of everybody how to follow the birds in flight, because it's quite difficult to keep them then in the focusing frames itself when you're using CIF only. My experience is that this works better, but as said, both is possible.
So a question which I also thought, which Mike has asked at the end, he basically, is subject tracking the only use for the AI recognition, or does it work independently of tracking as well?
I didn't get this, sorry.
Okay, sorry. If you want the benefit of AI tracking, of AI subject identification, do you have to use the tracking mode, or will it work with just continuous autofocus?
It works also with continuous autofocus only. That's new in the camera. So it's compared to the EM1X worked only with CIF plus tracking, but the new camera, the OM1, is working also in CIF and single IF. And I try to explain the differences, because when you're using CIF only, then the camera focus only in the focus field you have chosen. So for example, you have this cross type autofocus in the center and the bird is in the upper right corner. Then it shows you that it is recognized, but it is not focusing on that bird because it's not within your focusing field. However, when you're using the same setting with continuous autofocus plus tracking, it recognizes the bird in the upper right corner and is also focusing on it. That's the main differences between CIF and CIF plus tracking. And as the tracking functionality is also focusing when the bird is not within your selected focusing fields, it's of course easier to track flying birds, because then you don't have to care about that they are in your fields. So that was what I would like to point out, the differences of those two modes.
Okay, that's an important difference then, and sounds like a good one. Okay, thank you. We'll move on from Mike now. So I think, Mark, you commented on that one on the thread. I think your question has been answered, Mark Johnson. So we'll move on to, okay, Ashton SD, are you here? It's a fairly simple question, I think, regarding what comes with the camera. So I'll ask the question for everyone. Number one, does the camera come with its own power supply? So basically something you can plug into the wall. Obviously, you can power the camera with USB-C, and you can charge the battery internally with USB-C. And the second question is, does it charge two batteries concurrently or one after the other?
So the charger is coming not with a power supply, because you got already the charger with the camera, so you can use the same charger as you get with the camera. So the battery charger itself is not coming with the power supply. And yes, it is charging both batteries in parallel, as long as you are using a power supply supporting power delivery 3.0 or newer.
Okay.
So you need at least 27 watts to charge both batteries at once.
Okay. I think on the M1X, it charges one battery, then the next one. Is that right?
No, the M1X is also charging both battery in parallel when
oh,
it's
okay.
body.
Okay, that was my impression, and I was wrong. Okay, fair enough. Thank you for the clarification. Okay. So lots of answers on there already. Okay, we're coming back to the shutter question from Rogues. I don't know, Rogues, are you here?
Ah, yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Simon Roberts. Okay, so Simon, we may have answered some of your questions, but do you want any further clarification?
Yeah, well, there are a few things. I don't understand why you'd have blackout at a slower electronic shutter rate than at a higher one. Surely you'd expect more blackout if it was going more quickly. Are there any other qualitative differences that might make blackout desirable?
Not that I know that there are differences, quality differences. I just know that there's a different modes, different readout modes of the sensor. But I have not more details on that, sorry.
Okay. Could I ask a question about autofocus? I didn't actually write down.
Sure.
If there's two birds, as I understand it, with tracking, every point is being used. So it'll see the birds, whether it's in top right or bottom left. So is there no way to choose which one it focuses on?
Now then it's using the one that's closer to your selected autofocus field, and if you have selected all autofocus field, then the one which is closer to the center.
Okay, so there's a weighting towards what you've chosen, even though it's looking at all of the points.
Yes.
Excellent.
And there's also an improvement in the interface, because in the EM1X there was sometimes difficult to see or to predict where the camera will focus on. And now the bird where the camera will focus on is marked with a thicker widescreen, wide frame, and the others with a more grayish frame, so that you can also see in the viewfinder already which bird the camera will focus on. So that's also an improvement there. Hmm?
That sounds brilliant. Excellent.
You're
I've got a few other questions. I don't want to hog the time, but the
That's
wireless
all right.
remote, the OI app is absolutely brilliant on my iPhone. Why do you make a wireless remote? Does that add anything?
That's a good question. First of all, I don't know whether you would like to use your phone in heavy rain. So So the new remote control is IP57 rated, so it's even more splash proof than the camera itself. And second of all, of course, you are not losing a battery life on your phone. And third is it's coming with a cable. So in case the battery is empty in the remote control, you can still use it as a cable release, which is quite convenient, I think. So even though the battery lasts about a year when you shoot 30 frames per day, it is even usable when battery is empty as a normal cable release. So, but it's of course up to you. You can also use the OI share. We are happy with both.
Perfect, thank you. I did just ask, is there going to be an underwater housing? There was one for the Mark II, but not for the Mark III. Are Olympus planning to look after underwater guys, or just leave it to third-party underwater?
We will not make an underwater housing from our side, so we expect that third-party manufacturers will do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I would expect this camera to attract a lot of attention from the underwater housing industry, without a doubt. Not that I'm an expert, but yeah. Okay. We have Ed from Northern Ireland, and Ed is here, but he can't talk because he hasn't got a microphone. So I'll ask his question for him. I think he's a little bit concerned with the arrival of the OM-1 that support for the existing models may wane. I don't know how much you can really answer about. I think it was kind of touched on earlier on regarding firmware updates and things like that. But Mark actually did say in his press presentation that there are no discontinued models. So I suppose the tentative answer is that support continues.
Yeah, with the spin-off of the camera divisions from Olympus, we took also over all the responsibilities for the hardware made by Olympus. So as long as the camera is not discontinued, we will continue with the support of the products for sure.
Okay.
So there is no change in this direction. Right.
Okay. A quick one from Dave. Dave in Wales. He has heard that the Viewfinder and the iCup are an improvement for spectacle wearers, glasses. Can you confirm that?
I can confirm that. First of all, the iCap is much better than the iCap of the EM1X or EM1 Mark III. And secondly, especially when you wear sunglasses with polarizing glasses, then the OLED has an advantage that you can use it also in portrait and landscape, because OLEDs do not using polarizing light to make the image. So those 2 points are improved.
Okay. We have another Mike asking about shooting modes. And now I think we've answered many of these questions, but is Mike here?
Yeah, is that me?
Yes.
Yeah, let me slightly focus the if I can use that term, the question. I'm still not clear what the difference is between electronic sequential shooting and SH2 from a technical point of view. Are they? Do you get the same image quality from the same mode, from the different modes, or are they different?
Regarding to my information, the image quality is different. However, the image quality is the same. Sorry. However, the readout method is different between those modes, and as the readout method is different, you get the blackout free with the SH modes. That's what I have. Honestly, I had not tested it by myself yet, but I would not expect differences in image quality.
Okay.
I get the impression. Sorry, I'll just quickly add some comment. I get the impression it's a hangover from the previous models. It's still in the operating system, and they decided not to remove it because it gives you flexibility on shooting rate. But that's just me, my speculations.
Okay, well, I would, previous question was asked about lower frame rates with SH2. That would be really useful because we don't always want 25 frames per second.
I will forward that.
And blackout free is really worthwhile.
Yeah, I will forward that and also try to find out the other questions you had with the quality difference. But as I didn't get any information in this direction, I expect that the quality is the same.
Okay, can I ask another question while I'm here, or is that?
Yes, of course.
I looked at Tesne's review online, which was very good. And one of the things she said, she posted some raw images, or they were raw and then processed. She said she used noise reduction in the camera for the higher ISO settings. So you're doing some processing on the raw files before their output. Does that impact on the frame rate if you're doing extra processing to reduce noise in camera?
First of all, any company producing cameras are processing the raw files before you see it. Okay. That's no difference whether in all brands, because believe me, you don't want to see the raw file from the sensor itself. It doesn't look like an image at all. And no, to come back to your question, no, it doesn't influence the sequential shooting speed.
And is that in-camera noise reduction at all ISO values, or is it just above a certain ISO value?
You mean raw image processing?
Yes, yes.
The raw, it's actually not really noise reduction. It's kind of how to handle the data and how to realize a good looking image. It's a lot of things is involved in at any ISO you do something on the raw files internally, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's great. One other thing that you did say on the thread was, is it possible to have more faster shooting in SH2 mode?
Faster shooting?
Yeah, more FPS.
Than 50 frames per second?
Yeah, I think so.
So at the moment, I have no indication in this direction. I think 50 frames are quite good already. So nobody in the market is able to do that at the moment. So we will see what futures bring, but I'm a bit surprised that even more frame rates are requested, because I do get a lot of questions in the other direction. Who needs that? So yeah.
Don't worry, we'll find a use. Okay, now moving on then. I think Graham's not here. He's asking a question about stabilization and the OM-1. I think that because the OM-1 has an improvement in the sensor shift stabilization, it's only a small improvement. He just wants clarification about when you use the 100 to 400, what would you recommend is the best stabilization setting?
As in the EM1 Mark III, use both the camera and the image stabilization of the lens. However, or even though they do not work in sync like the other sync enabled lenses, there is an improvement in performance because the camera takes over the rotation part and the rest is done by the lens. So in the case of the 100 to 400, I would switch on both.
Okay, that's good. I wasn't aware of that myself, so I've learned something. Okay, and I think we've asked, Goon has asked his question, so let's move on. Linus, future firmware support, is Linus here? Okay, I think we have covered that. And I think he's wondering whether there's any chance of the video clip limit being changed on the older models. Do you have any comment on that?
No, yeah, there is no plan to do that for older models. So the limitation in video filming will stay in the older models. So we do not have plans to change that.
Okay. Tordan, is Tordan here from Sweden? Okay, maybe not. He has a question about AF performance. He's one of our, I mean, we have lots of star bird in flight photographers, bird photographers, but he is one of our top echelon. He has a question about AF performance when used with 4/3 lenses. Now, we actually did cover that earlier. Right, okay, so we've covered his questions. He's also asking about whether AF will be supported when shooting video on the old lenses. So that's already covered. Now, Box Brownie is here, I believe, but not able to talk. So somebody, yes, he's the person that was a bit worried that the allocation of cameras to the UK have been sold out, but I think we've covered that. So get your order in and you should still get it in the first batch, is the message. I think, Mark, is that correct?
I think Mark is gone, no?
Okay, never mind.
But
yes,
I understood his comment as well, as you said, yeah.
Yes,
Same,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, last page, and then we'll come back to the questions which have been posted on the chat. Okay, so Andy Shenstone, you've got a question.
Yeah, it's a more of a general question. We often see this is one stop better, but it's not always clear what you're measuring against. Is it the 1X or the 1 Mark III, etc. And just as a more general point, I'm still using the 1 Mark II, which is a better camera than I am a photographer still. But do you have anywhere somewhere where we can compare multiple models? I know I can go to DxO, but it takes a long time to see. And I'm really wondering how much better this camera is than mine, rather than one of the others that you might be measuring it against. Do you have anywhere that roadmap of improvements?
Oh, okay. So we always, when we talk about the improvements, we always compare to the EM1 Mark III, because the OM1 is direct successor of the EM1 Mark III. So our comparison always to the EM1 Mark III. However, differences in noise performance and dynamic range of EM1 Mark III, EM1X, and EM1 Mark II are quite small. So I would say negligible. So nearly no difference between these three models. When you compare it to an EM1 first generation, you will have even a much bigger improvement, because in the EM1 first generation, we had a different sensor, which was especially in long time exposure, not that good regards to noise performance. So I would expect that you have a much better improvement to the EM1 first generation, but the rest of the three mentioned cameras are quite close together in terms of image quality.
Thank you.
Okay. We have a question about the 100-400 and continuous autofocus settings. That's just Big Sam. Is Big Sam here? No? Okay, I'll read it out. What would be the best setting for continuous autofocus using the 100-400 lens to capture, for example, kingfishers from a perch to flying fast with busy background? So I presume he has his own setup for the existing cameras, but he's wondering whether you would recommend a different setup for the OM1. That's my assumption.
As said, my personal preference on the OM1 is the bird tracking AF with the continuous autofocus and no tracking, because that's, for me, it's working quite well. And if you have busy background, I would lower the IF sensitivity to -1. But then you have to keep in mind that when the bird is flying towards you, it could also happen that you get fails in the focusing, because focusing reactivity is slower than when you have it on +1, which I normally would use when you have kind of erratic small bird in front of your camera. So again, also coming back to what you are able to achieve. It's always a good idea to use the focus limiter when you know that the object you are shooting has is keeping a certain distance and is not reaching or is keeping a certain distance area. Then of course that helps also the camera to focus faster, because then it's not hunting in the whole focus range. So that's always a good thing to do. Hope that answers the question.
Right, that's good. Thank you very much. And question from OM user. Are you here?
Hello, Ian.
Yes. Hi, Jeremy. Yes.
Yes.
I get you and Ron mixed up for some reason. I wasn't quite sure. Anyway.
Yeah, others do. Before I actually ask the question, which I'm hoping is quite simple, I'd like to state that as far as my knowledge goes about the 29-minute video recording limit, European countries impose a tax on anything that records 30 minutes or more. This is in addition to any other taxes that might be applicable on recording devices. So if Olympus or OMDS were to provide any update to retrofit the 29-minute limit, they would have to pay tax. So it's not going to happen.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's a law which has been valid until 2020, I think, and then there was a commitment between Japan and the European Union that this will not be the case anymore, and that's one of the reasons why we skipped this border with the OM-1.
Thank you for that update. My question, I'm on quite a high-end gaming laptop, which unfortunately is stuck on Windows 8.1. Obviously, I can't run Olympus Workspace 2.0, so I'm stuck on Olympus Workspace 1.5. Will I be able to edit the new RAW files, or will there be an update so that I can edit the new RAW files on 1.5 within the capabilities of Olympus Workspace 1.5?
No, unfortunately not. We will not have an update of the older OM workspaces.
But would I be able to edit the JPEGs if I use RAW plus JPEG on the camera?
I would expect that you can open up these JPEGs, because that's a standard format and should also work with the older one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Right, I'm just checking to see whether we have any more questions online. And it doesn't look like it. So let's go to the questions that have been posted in the chat. And I think Stuart is the first, Stuart Ord. Do you want to talk to Michael, or shall I read your question out? Okay, I'll read it out. So he's basically asking about the sensor's contribution to the improved performance of the new camera. And he's asking, won't other manufacturers simply catch up? And in fact, I think Sony itself does have similar technology in some of their cameras already, because they get special access to their own sensor technology. Now, I don't think Michael's going to admit that this is a Sony sensor because it's a political matter, but I think we all know it is. But I don't know whether you've read the question from Stuart, Michael, on the chat. Do you have anything to comment on that?
Regards on sensor technology, of course, also a backside illuminated stack sensor is possible with 35mm cameras, as you see it in the Z9 from Nikon, the R3 from Canon, and the ACE1 from Sony. However, you see also that the prices are much higher than ours. So it's roughly 3 times the price we are offering the system. And of course, this kind of technology can be also adapted by 35mm cameras, no doubt. But as we are using a smaller sensor, I think fitting or reaching the readout speed we are using at the moment is quite difficult to achieve by a bigger sensor, because bigger sensor means also higher heating issues when you read the sensor out in a faster speed. So I think our advantage of the system is to have higher readout speed available. So, and then this is the base to achieve 50 frames per second continuous autofocus and 120 frames per second single autofocus performance.
And from my days when I used to write about silicon chip manufacturing a long time ago, the very fact that a full frame sensor is 4 times the area of the the 4/3 sensor, the cost to manufacture that chip is much more than 4 times the cost, because it goes up exponentially. So the cost is never going to be cheap for a full frame sensor. Okay, next we have Mark wanting some examples. I think we covered that. I think Michael can probably answer this. Is the March 7th retail date still on?
We start delivering at the 7th, at the week starting with the 7th March. Of course, when it is then on the shop itself depends on when they ordered and how the delivery chain is working. So when you ordered on a shop, on a physical shop, you should ask your local dealer when the camera is coming, but we start shipping at 7th March.
Okay. Jeff has a question, which I think we may have covered. Is Jeff still there about the 100-400? Do you want to ask any more questions in that area? Okay, probably not.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, Jeff. Okay, go ahead.
I was just unmuting. How does the 100-400 perform for birds in flight with this new camera? Because I have no problem with the Mark III, as you probably see, but what advantage will I gain by, spending out and buying a new camera?
So compared to the EM1 Mark III, you have the advantage they have the intelligent subject detection, that you can just use it for the birds. And of course, focusing accuracy it's higher as you have more points available to calculate the focusing itself. And beside that, all the other improvements you get with the sensor, so noise performance is better. So especially when you shoot birds, I think you have to raise the ISO quite often to achieve a certain short exposure time. And of course, this benefits then also for your shooting at the end of the day, that you have cleaner, high ISO images and can shoot with lower exposure times.
Yeah, my question mainly is regarding the 100-400 lens, because obviously a lot of the people that have been testing the camera out have got the 150-400, which is out of most people's price ranges. The 100-400 is at the bottom end of the scale. How does the camera perform with that particular lens?
I would say in a similar way and as your EM1 Mark III. Beside that, you have continuous autofocus with 25 frames per second. So the 100-400 is not supporting the 50 frames per second as the 150-400, but still 25 frames per second continuous shooting is quite an update to the 18 you had with the EM1 Mark III. But honestly, I haven't used personally the 100-400 yet with the new camera. So I cannot share my experience there, and would recommend when you would like to see the differences to test it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. We're back to Bill. Bill, are you still there? Bill Dennis?
Hi.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Hello.
You asked me a question about when should we be using the mechanical shutter?
Yes, I quite often try and take panning shots of birds in flight, and with the electronic shutter, you get these tilting buildings in the background due to the rolling shutter effect. So firstly, I wondered if the OM-1 will improve this quite a lot, hopefully, with electronic shutter. So in that case, when should I consider using the mechanical shutter, since we have much better sensor reader with this new camera?
So it's considerably improved with the new camera. So if you look on the specifications, one indication is the flash sync time. The flash sync time of the EM1 Mark III was 1/60 of a second, and now we have 100 of a second. In addition, we did some additional improvements to reduce the rolling shutter effect. So I would expect that in case you are shooting birds in flight, just by panning, you will not see a lot of these effects. But for example, when you're shooting a fast running Formula One car or a fan, for example, which is rotating quite fast, for sure you will still see this kind of effects. And then, of course, mechanical shutter is recommended to use to avoid this kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so Nikon has actually done away with the mechanical shutter on the Z9. So they seem pretty confident that sensors can do the work of a shutter. But it's interesting, an interesting point. Okay, Robin Proctor, are you here, Robin? Did you want to ask a question? Okay. I can hear, no, okay. Okay, cats and dogs tracking, will it also work with other types of animal?
Yes, for sure. Actually, when you select this mode in camera, there is mentioned animals and then in brackets like cats and dogs. So as long as they look similar to the cats and dogs, for example, a lion, I would expect that this will be recognized by the subject detection. I'm not 100% sure whether a giraffe, for example, will be detected, but in the camera itself, when you select the mode, it's mentioned animals like dogs and cats. So yeah, it should.
Okay, well, interesting to see how that actually works in practice. Alan is wondering about AI tracking and lenses. Will the lenses be left behind, the older lenses? I think we have covered this, in that the AI tracking actually is independent of the lens, really, because it will work with older 4/3 lenses. But obviously, there are some aspects of the new camera that are limited to some of the higher performance lenses, like the continuous autofocus at the very high frame rates. Could you clarify that, Michael?
Yeah, again, as you said, the AI tracking is done by the camera itself. So it will recognize also an object in front of the camera when you're using older lenses. However, whether the image is at the end of the day in focus or not highly depends on the speed of the lens itself. So especially in continuous autofocus, you will be much slower with the 4/3 lenses than with micro 4/3 lenses.
Okay, Mark Farrington is next, but I think we've covered that, Mark, so I'll move on. Okay. Lawrence mentioned something about sunglasses. Is there something I missed earlier on? Lawrence, are you still there?
Just bracing that polarizing sunglasses are working now.
So that must have been covered earlier, which I missed about, or maybe he read about it, but that's certainly an issue which bothers me a lot because I do have polarized sunglasses. But that's good news.
I'll just pop in quickly here is that, yes, I did pass that as more or less as a comment, which is it pleases me that I can now use my polarized sunglasses when using the OM-1.
Yeah, Lawrence, I was considering buying a new pair of non-polarized glasses, but I've got varifocals, so you know it's quite a bit of extra expense.
Yes, I did exactly that. I bought another pair, but I prefer my polarized ones.
Yes, yes, of course, and of course you're tuning in from Australia, aren't you? So
yes, from Brisbane.
Yes, hello. Good day.
Hello there.
Nice to see you. Okay, Bill Williams talking about workspace. Bill, are you there? Do you want to talk about this? Basically, he's asking about what is the earliest Olympus body supported by the AI noise reduction, or is it just the OM-1?
No, the noise reduction supports OM-1, EM-1 Mark III, EM-1X, EM-1 Mark II, and EM-5 Mark III.
Excellent. That's more good news. Thank you for the question. Is there any limitation on the video card?
There are some minimum system requirements I do not have in mind. You have to read them at the website to meet that the noise reduction is possible to use. If you do not have the minimum requirements, you get a message from the software that's not supported.
Okay.
And you would not get these extra tab in the tools to use it.
Okay. Back to Robin Proctor. Onboard noise reduction, selectable on-off option. Are we talking about? Well, there used to be noise reduction for JPEGs. Is there noise reduction for RAW now? I've never seen that before.
No. I think there's a misunderstanding because there was a questions about handling the RAW files. These noise reduction, which you can switch on and off in the camera, is JPEG only.
Yeah.
It is, of course, recognized by OM Workspace at the end of the day. So when you open the RAW file in Workspace, that's automatically switched on for RAW files as well. But it is not applied to the RAW file. So you can switch it off of the RAW file in the post-production when you're using OM Workspace. So
okay, that's clear.
What I meant before, what I meant beforehand with RAW files is that, of course, there is a processing on RAW files in general because the real RAW format from the sensor nobody would like to see.
No. Okay. SD cards. Jeff is asking, do we need to buy new SD cards?
No, the same SD cards can be used. However, of course, it's recommended to have a very fast one when you're shooting 120 frames per second. But there is no other specifications to the SD cards than before.
Okay, I'm going to whiz through these quite quickly. So now, Michael, I expect you to answer this question. Okay, when will there be an EM-1X successor? So give us all details right now.
Yeah, you know the official answer is that we cannot speak about future products before they are released. So
and I think Lawrence has a similar question. Well, actually, we covered firmware earlier. Okay, and Andy is requesting Home AF. There's another suggestion for the engineers.
Actually, I saw that question in the forum, and I was a bit surprised that this has been changed. I was not aware of that, and I can understand the request. So I will ask R&D to bring that back. I have not found also sometimes they move functionalities, but I haven't found that the functionality is somewhere else. So let's see what's coming up.
Okay, thank you for that. If you can let me know, I can let everyone else know on the forum, or you can post it yourself as you are a member. Okay, Bill Williams' observation. Okay, so this is about software. I think we'll skip over that as we're a bit over time now. David, I think the answer is if you order your OM now, you'll get it. It will be shipped on the 7th of March. I think that's been confirmed, unless there's been a huge rush to buy them today. Okay, so I think we are getting close to the end. Confused about assist birds. Confused about using Workspace with AI on a Mac. What is the minimum Mac OS spec? He has a mid-2015 MacBook Pro. Do you have any idea whether that's...
my understanding on Mac is that it's less depending on the hardware than depending on the operating system, because I think for supporting the AI noise reduction, Aqua 2 support is needed. So just Google for Aqua 2 whether your MacBook is supported or not. My MacBook from 2018 is working well. 2015 could be on the edge. I cannot confirm here. I just read that Aqua 2 is the technology from Apple, and I think that depends on the operating system you're running and not on the hardware itself.
Okay, Robin, just quickly asking about shipping date. Is that from Japan or from Europe, UK? I think you mean that cameras go out on the 7th, and so they'll take whatever it takes the shipper to reach your home. Is that correct?
Yes, shipping date is 7th March from our facilities in Europe.
Okay,
so they are already on the way to Europe, and we start shipping from Europe at 7th March.
Does that mean that stock is coming from Hamburg?
No, our warehouse is in Düren. It's close to Cologne.
But even UK stock will come from Germany?
Yes.
Okay. So it may take slightly longer to go across the border, I suspect, than in continental Europe. Okay. Fine, I think we've reached the end. Does anybody else have anything else they want to say before we wrap up?
My question.
Okay, Jeremy's got his hands up. I should have asked you to put your hands up, but Jeremy, quickly.
It's not a question. It's just a statement, really, for both Michael and Mark's still on the line. I would like to see the new sensor in an EM5 sized camera, because I find that the Mark 1s, 2s and 3s and the EM1 series much too big for my hands. It's just a request, please, and I'm willing to wait and pay when it comes out. Thank
Jeremy,
you.
that's noted. Thanks.
Okay, somebody else wanted to say something. Okay, David.
My original question was, if we order from OM Systems, will it be shipped on the 7th of March rather than having to order from, say, WEX and wait for OM Systems to get it to WEX and then they will send it out?
I apologize. I thought it was a simpler question, but that's a good one. I don't know, Mark might want to answer that if he's still there.
bug is not there anymore.
Oh, okay.
I can answer that. Shipment start is 7th March. When you order it on our shop, it's 7th of March, and when you order it in Wex, it's also 7th of March. Whether it takes longer through Wex or through our online shop, I cannot judge because I'm not so close to the UK market. But yeah, should be nearly the same timing, right?
David, I can catch up with Mark later and try and answer that question for you. Okay, right. I think that's it. I can see lots of thank yous to Michael for the use of his time and the fact that he's going to have a very short lunch break now. Hopefully he's prepared for that. So thank you very much. I learned a lot today, and everything looks very, very positive. And it's nice to be back on Zoom. I hope to do some more of these more frequently. Okay, so thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone, and see you on the forum.
Also would like to say that I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
And thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.